The email didn't even have a subject line, just my name, followed by a sterile block of text, legal, hollow, and final. It arrived before sunrise. Time-stamped, 4:17 like it had been scheduled by someone who didn't have the spine to face daylight. I read it twice before I exhaled. My father had been dead for 6 days. There was no meeting, no explanation. Just your position has been terminated effective immediately. A line about unused benefits, a line about access revoked, and a short, clipped, "We wish you the best." I sat at my kitchen table in silence, fingers curled around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold sometime in the last hour. My shoes were already on. I had planned to stop by the office, grab the condolence cards left on my desk, and thank the few people who had sent messages after the funeral. But now, that wasn't happening. My first thought wasn't anger. It was clarity. A kind of stripped-down awareness, like the hush after a thunderclap. Grief makes time heavy and slow, like water pressing against your ribs. But betrayal, real betrayal, has a different weight. It cuts the air clean. 2 weeks earlier, I'd stood waist-deep in river water behind my childhood home, scattering my father's ashes between the stones he used to skip across the surface. He'd always said rivers don't rage forever. They soften, even the sharpest rocks, with time. Standing in that water, I believed him. Now I wasn't so sure. I didn't cry. Not then. I opened my laptop, read the email one more time, and marked it as unread. Then I packed a small box with the few things I still had access to: documents I had created, contracts I had authored, templates only I understood. I didn't take anything I didn't earn. I didn't need to. What I carried out of that building wasn't in the box. It was in my spine. When I arrived at the office, the security guard blinked at me awkwardly. He had known my father too, back when I started in the company as a junior coordinator. He mumbled something about not knowing what had happened. I just nodded. There was nothing for him to say. It wasn't his decision. The walk to my desk felt surreal. My badge still worked. No one had disabled it yet. Or maybe they'd hoped I would come in and cause a scene, make it easier to paint me as unprofessional, unstable. But I didn't give them that story. I greeted the few coworkers who noticed me with a slight nod. Some stared, others lowered their eyes. My team, my real team, stood up as I approached. No words, just stillness. One of them, Rachel, reached out and squeezed my shoulder gently. It was enough. I didn't linger. I collected a framed photo, a cactus I'd been trying to keep alive for the last 4 years, and a leather notebook my father had given me after my first promotion. Then I turned off the light at my desk. No one from upper management came out. No farewell email, no HR meeting, just absence. I walked out without saying a word. No door slammed, no speech delivered. That's not how storms start. Real storms begin, quietly. They gather in silence, unnoticed, until it's too late to run. In the parking lot, I looked up at the sky. It was gray, not dramatic, not cinematic, just gray. I started the engine, pulled out slowly, and drove with the windows down, letting the air slap my face awake. They thought they could replace me with silence. That if they erased my login, they could erase everything I'd built. But buildings don't stand because of the walls. They stand because of the foundation. And I had been the concrete beneath theirs for years. That afternoon, I didn't call anyone, not even my mother, not even my boyfriend. I needed to let the air settle first, to hear the silence clearly before I chose what sound to make next. And deep down, I already knew something they didn't. The river remembers. I spent the next few days doing nothing that looked like revenge. I went for walks without my phone. I sat on the porch with my father's old thermos of tea and stared at the same tree he used to carve little notches into, counting seasons like a quiet ritual. I didn't answer emails. I didn't open LinkedIn. I didn't even check the calendar alerts still pinging from my synced work account until they stopped, one by one, like lights going out in a building being evacuated. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of memory. I remembered how hard I had worked to keep that team alive during the layoffs, how I'd volunteered to take a temporary pay cut so we wouldn't have to let go of the new hires. I remembered the nights I left the office at 10 p.m., the weekend calls, the meetings I ran for managers who didn't bother showing up. And I remembered how no one said thank you. Not when I stepped up, not when I stepped down. I wasn't angry yet, not exactly. I was watching. I was measuring. I was calculating. And on the fourth day, I received a message from an old industry contact, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His email was short but personal. He'd heard, somehow, word travels faster than truth. He offered coffee, or lunch, or just a walk if that felt easier. He ended with a line that stayed in my head longer than I admitted. You always deserved better than they knew how to give. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need a new job yet. I needed to feel the edges of the old one, to hold the weight of what had been taken from me, not the paycheck, but the place I had once believed in, the purpose I had let them borrow, and the loyalty I had given them so freely. By the end of the week, the calls started. Rachel called first. Her voice was quiet, like she was afraid to be overheard. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "It's different here now." Then she paused, and I heard what she didn't say. I asked what she meant. "They're floundering. Jason's pretending to know your systems, but he doesn't. Clients are complaining. Emma's crying in the bathroom again. It's like no one's steering the ship." I told her I was listening. That's all. Then Alex called, then Jenna, then Colin. Each of them tiptoed around the same truth. They didn't want to be there anymore. Not without me. Not with the new regime trying to control everything through fear instead of clarity. One of them said it felt like the soul had been sucked out of the place. Another said the walls themselves felt heavier, like even the building knew something had gone wrong. I didn't recruit them. I didn't promise anything. I just listened. And then I met my old contact for lunch. We didn't talk about my old job. We talked about the future, about culture, about leadership, about building something that didn't run on burnout and backstabbing. He asked what I needed. I told him I didn't want a role. I wanted a foundation. Name it. He said, "You've earned it." But I didn't name it yet. Not until I knew what my people needed too, the ones left behind in that sinking ship, because I wasn't going to climb out alone. It's not how you rebuild. Meanwhile, something shifted inside me. Not rage, but resolve. I remembered what my father told me the first time I got passed over for a promotion. Don't scream when they underestimate you. Just let the ground beneath them shift. So I let it shift. I drafted a plan, quietly, strategically, every name, every position, every strength. I remembered who had been loyal, who had stayed late, covered shifts, told the truth when it was hard. I wasn't building an escape. I was preparing an invitation. But not yet. Not until the storm had really started. Not until the collapse was more than just whispers in a hallway. And then something small happened. The kind of moment most people would miss. I received a second email from that same HR department. This time, it wasn't just cold, it was cowardly. A legalese-filled explanation about how my termination had been procedurally compliant, but emotionally unfortunate. They offered a standard settlement hush money disguised as compensation. I stared at the screen, then clicked decline. No comments, no reply. That was the moment I knew they were afraid. Because only guilty people try to preempt the storm with apologies they don't mean. The thing about guilt is, it leaks. No matter how many NDAs they write, no matter how carefully they redact the truth, it finds its way into the walls, into hallway whispers, into exit interviews and broken glances at the copier. The office that once echoed with strategy now trembled with suspicion. And I didn't need to be there to feel it. I started getting blind messages from people I barely knew. A junior analyst I'd once helped during a software rollout emailed me from a personal account. Is it true? Did they really fire you like that? Another message came through a mutual contact. I don't feel safe anymore. Everyone's afraid of being next. They weren't reaching out for gossip. They were reaching out for clarity, for a lighthouse. And I was done being quiet for their comfort. So I replied, but only to those who asked with sincerity. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I told them the truth plainly, like a woman who no longer needed to apologize for being calm in chaos. And in the background, the offer from my contact was growing roots. What started as a lunch was now a potential department, a full team, a chance to build a culture from scratch. I told him I needed flexibility not just for me, but for the people I trusted, the ones left behind in the wreckage. He said yes before I finished the sentence. So I made a list, not a hit list, a hope list. People whose integrity had held my old team together, even as leadership tore it apart. People who had mentored interns without being asked. People who had cried silently in bathrooms and still returned to their desks without bitterness. People who never raised their voice but somehow made everyone feel safe. I reached out slowly, one by one, carefully. Most didn't need convincing, they just needed permission. One said, I thought I'd be stuck there forever. Another said, are you sure it's real? That someone like you wants someone like me again? And that's when I realized how deep the damage had gone. They hadn't just fired me. They had fractured belief in self-worth, in fairness, in loyalty. My job now wasn't just recruitment, it was restoration. Meanwhile, word was getting out. My old boss Lena started calling around. Not me, of course. Never me. She reached out to mutuals. What's she planning? Is she bitter? Does she want to sue? They still didn't get it. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to make them irrelevant. And it was working. Clients I hadn't spoken to in months started calling. We heard you're back in the game. Is it true you're leading something new? Do you have space for us I hadn't pitched? I hadn't advertised. But value has a pulse. And when it goes missing, people start looking for the one who made it beat. By month's end, we had signed a lease, a modest space with clean light and no memory, the kind of office you could breathe in. I picked out the chairs myself, nothing fancy, but comfortable, real wood, not the brittle plastic they'd always ordered in bulk. And then, quietly, we opened our doors. No grand announcement, no ribbon cutting, just a few emails, a few handshakes, and a team that looked each other in the eye. The first Monday felt like the first breath after being underwater. Laughter wasn't loud, but it was real. Meetings ended early, because no one was playing politics. People stayed late not because they had to, but because they wanted to finish what they started. And I knew, in that stillness, that we were building something that couldn't be poached or replicated. Because we had something Lena never understood, trust is louder than power. Back at the old company, the unraveling had begun. I didn't watch. I didn't stalk their LinkedIn updates. But people talked, quietly, respectfully. Files were missing. Clients were threatening to leave. Someone in compliance had started asking questions. Lena had started working from home more. HR had begun conducting wellness interviews. And still, I didn't gloat. I didn't toast to their downfall. I just watered the cactus on my new desk and went back to work. It wasn't until a small box showed up at our office, no return address, just my name scrawled in soft, hesitant handwriting, that I paused long enough to feel something crack open inside me. Inside was the cactus, the same one I'd left behind, thinking someone would toss it. Or, worse, forget it entirely. It had survived. A little more crooked now, with one leaf bent like a broken finger but alive. Someone had taken care of it, or at least had thought to save it when the walls began to fall. I didn't ask who sent it. I didn't need to. I placed it by the window, let it feel the sun, and got back to my meeting. We were onboarding 2 new clients that day, both of whom had left the old company without a fuss. No lawsuits, no headlines, just quiet signatures, like footsteps leaving a room before anyone notices. That was the beauty of it. No noise, no war, just gravity shifting in our favor. Rachel thrived in her new role. She didn't need my permission anymore. She ran her department with a calm efficiency that reminded me of the version of myself I had almost forgotten before the exhaustion, before the betrayal. Alex brought in a new system for client feedback that made our retention rate spike in the first quarter. Jenna started a wellness initiative, one that actually meant something. It felt like watching old wounds close from the inside out. But we never talked about the past. Not directly. It lingered like fog, visible only in how we move differently now. Aware, measured, not afraid, but alert. And then the news broke. A friend forwarded it to me, a trade article, buried halfway down the page. The old company had launched an internal investigation, financial discrepancies, misfiled compliance documents. A mid-level exec had quietly resigned. 2 others were under review. And Lena, well, she was on leave pending further clarification. That phrase, further clarification. It meant the dam had cracked, but no one wanted to admit the flood yet. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. I just set my phone down and kept editing the proposal on my screen. There was a quote from my father scribbled in the notebook beside me. The river doesn't raise its voice, but it always knows the way downhill. Let them slide. More former colleagues reached out this time with urgency. The ones who'd stayed too long, hoping things would improve. Some were burned, some were numb, some were just tired of surviving instead of working. I didn't say yes to all of them. This wasn't a rescue mission, as I guess it was a rebuild. We weren't just collecting people. We were curating values. But the hardest email came from someone I hadn't expected. Lena. It arrived late, almost midnight. Short. Not groveling, but not proud either. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she now understood certain decisions had consequences. She didn't apologize, not outright. She just said she hoped I was doing well. And I was. But I didn't reply. Because not every silence is a wound. Some are boundaries. Some are memorials to the version of yourself that once begged for fairness. And some are the final full stop. That night, I dreamt of the river again, but this time, I wasn't scattering ashes. I was just standing there, bare feet on smooth stones, watching the current carry away something I no longer needed to name. And when I woke up, the sun was already rising. Steady, quiet, inevitable. We were 6 months in by then, growing, thriving, clients renewing early, staff retention at 95%. But numbers didn't define our success. It was the quiet moments, the way Rachel smiled when her team surprised her with a birthday cake, the sound of Jenna's heels echoing through the open hallway with purpose, not panic. I'd built something, not to compete, not to retaliate, but to prove to myself, more than anyone, that dignity isn't fragile. that when handled carefully, it multiplies, and so does justice. Not the kind that shouts in courtrooms or slaps headlines across the internet, but the kind that leaves no fingerprints. That changes lives not by punishing the guilty, but by uplifting the forgotten. And I was one of them. Once. Now. I was the one writing the next chapter. Not just for me, for everyone who had once been told they were replaceable. The cactus bloomed that week, one small flower, pale yellow. I stood there staring at it for a long time, until Rachel passed by and whispered, "It chose the right place." So did we. There's a kind of power in stillness that most people never learn to respect. Not silence born of fear, but silence born of control. The kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't beg, doesn't try to explain. That was the lesson I had earned the hard way. Not from books or mentors, but from the quiet hours between betrayal and rebirth. And yet, even stillness has movement. Beneath the surface, things shift. By our 7th month, a pattern had formed. We weren't just gaining clients. We were becoming a symbol. Former interns from my old company reached out, telling me how different it felt to be seen, to be allowed to grow without fear. Mid-career professionals applied with resumes framed not in buzzwords, but in values. Words like respect, clarity, ethics, not things people usually list, but now they mattered. Even competitors began to notice. A few sent feelers, coffee invitations, informal discussions. I declined most. We weren't for sale. Not now. Not ever. We had already learned what happens when people sell their silence for a title. Meanwhile, from the wreckage of my former employer, rumors had turned to rot. An investigative piece came out. Nothing scandalous, nothing illegal, strictly speaking, but damning, in the way only truth can be. Former employees quoted anonymously, a pattern of neglect, a culture of erasure, numbers twisted for optics, promotions handed out like hush money, and in the center of it, Lena. She had returned briefly, then quietly stepped away again, this time with no statement, no handover, no gratitude, just absence, a vanishing act dressed up as grace. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't even feel much, because when someone finally stumbles on the path they carved with malice, it's not victory, it's symmetry. One evening, I stayed late at the office. Everyone else had gone home. The floor was quiet, the lights dimmed. I walked past the glass walls of our meeting rooms, now covered in project notes, milestones, birthdays, signs of life. I paused in front of the whiteboard where someone had scrawled a quote, "Build what you needed when you were breaking." I hadn't written it, but it could have been mine. I sat by the window and opened my father's notebook. The spine was worn, the pages soft with use. On one page, in his looping script, he had written, "They will test your stillness. They will mistake it for weakness. Let them." I closed the book and stared out at the city below. So much noise. So many buildings filled with people still clinging to broken systems. Still believing that titles protect them. Still trying to lead by control instead of trust. They hadn't learned. Not yet. But maybe someone listening would. The next day, I received another package. This one small, flat, and unexpected. Inside was a photo. Me and my father, taken the day of my first promotion. I was 28, standing next to him outside that same company back when I thought loyalty guaranteed safety. We both looked tired, but proud. On the back, someone had written he would have been proud of what you've built. No signature. No clue who sent it. But I felt the message in my bones. This wasn't just about a job. It never had been. It was about reclaiming what betrayal tried to erase the sense that you are allowed to exist fully, without permission. That quiet leadership is still leadership. That calm isn't passivity. It's a weapon, sharpened by restraint. Sometimes, I think back to the day I left, the hallway, the glances, the box in my hands. It wasn't the end. It was the prelude. And all the ones who watched me walk out thinking they had the last word, they're still chasing noise. I chose peace. But make no mistake, peace does not mean surrender. It means clarity. And once a woman finds clarity, nothing, not titles, not threats, not empty boardrooms can own her again. There was one final thread I hadn't expected to tug. It came quietly, as these things always do through an email forwarded from an old vendor contact. A former client of mine, one of the biggest accounts I'd once managed, was requesting a meeting. Not with my old company, with me. Apparently, they'd tried to navigate the new leadership after I left, tried to adapt to the sudden coldness, the lack of follow-through, the missing intuition in the details. But eventually, the weight of being treated like a number caught up with them. And now, months later, they were circling back not with bitterness, but with curiosity. I didn't jump at the opportunity. I waited, watched. I met them for lunch. Same cafe we used to close contracts in. Same server. But the tone was different. They weren't just looking for a vendor. They were searching for something they'd lost without realizing it. A working relationship built not just on service, but respect. I listened more than I spoke. I didn't pitch. I didn't brag about what I'd built. I didn't mention Lena. I didn't need to. I just asked them what they missed. They said, "You always remember the things we didn't know how to ask for." That was the real cost of my absence. Wasn't it? Not a gap in numbers or strategy, but the absence of care. They signed the following week, quietly, no announcement, just a dotted line and a thank you note written in actual ink. I pinned it on the corkboard in my office, beside a photo of the cactus, now flowering its second bloom. And still, I told no one what I was thinking, because revenge isn't loud. It's not a viral post, not a dramatic confrontation. It's the simple, unshakable knowledge that the people who doubted you now have to live with that mistake, every day, in quiet rooms, with shrinking results, and that the ones who believed in you, their rising shoulders straighter, eyes clearer, work lighter. Rachel gave a keynote speech at an industry summit 2 months later. She quoted something I'd once said to her in a meeting we both barely remembered. Don't try to be the loudest voice. Try to be the one people lower their voices to hear. I watched her from the back row, invisible, proud. And then the audit results went public. The old company had failed multiple compliance checks. A class action suit was forming, small but growing. Former employees were finally speaking. Now that the weight of silence had shifted, Lena's name didn't appear. It didn't need to. The story was written in the gaps. By then, we had passed our 1-year mark. Quietly, no party. Just a team breakfast and a new plaque in the hallway founded on integrity, built in silence, thriving by choice. I remember standing there, fingers brushing the edge of that plaque, and realizing I no longer flinched when I thought of the email, the one that began it all. Because that email didn't end anything. It revealed everything, their fear, their weakness, their inability to control what couldn't be broken. Me. They taught me how to leave with grace. I taught myself how to rebuild without resentment. And now they're just a cautionary tale told in side conversations, whispers in HR departments, case studies in training modules. They're not villains, just proof. Proof that empires built on fear always collapse. Slowly, then all at once. I never had to raise my voice. I just had to wait. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't scream. It arrives, steady as the tide, washing the footprints of betrayal clean, leaving only the stone. And I was that stone now. It was Rachel who suggested we take a team retreat, not for productivity, not for planning just to breathe, to remember what we'd built. We chose a quiet place upstate, by a river that reminded me of the one behind my father's house. No cell service, just trees, water, sky. The first night, after dinner, we sat around a fire. No corporate icebreakers, no team building games, just stories. Laughter that didn't ask for permission. Someone passed around a flask. Someone else shared a poem. At some point, Jenna leaned over and whispered, This is the company I always hoped existed. And I realized, so did I. But we didn't find it. We built it, brick by invisible brick, with restraint, with choice. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and walked to the river alone. The water was fast but quiet, brushing against rocks that never moved, no matter how many storms passed. I stood barefoot at the edge, watching the current reflect a sky that hadn't made up its mind yet, half light, half shadow. And I thought of him, my father, not as the man I lost, but as the presence I still carried. He used to say the rocks didn't win because they resisted the river. They won because they endured, because they let the water shape them, not shatter them. That was me now. I didn't return from that trip with a speech or a strategy. I didn't need one. The silence had done its work. 2 weeks later, I received another message, this time from someone new, young, nervous, full of potential. She'd been referred by one of our staff. She'd read about what we were building. She wrote, I want to learn from women who don't flinch. I stared at that line for a long time. Women who don't flinch. I had once been a woman who flinched, who apologized before speaking, who tried to soften her own clarity so others would feel less threatened. Not anymore. And that, in the end, was the real revenge, not what fell apart behind me, but what stood because I didn't. A year passed, then another. The old company dissolved in silence, absorbed, rebranded, quietly erased. No headlines, no tribute, just absence. Their website redirected to a consulting firm with a vague mission statement and borrowed language. No one I knew worked there anymore. And Lena, I saw her once at a gallery opening. She stood alone, drink in hand, scanning the room like she was still searching for relevance. Our eyes met. She gave a small nod, not regret, not pride, just recognition. We didn't speak. I turned away before she could, not out of pettiness, but precision. Some stories end not with confrontation, but with indifference. Later that night, I walked home alone. No car, no security detail, just me, coat buttoned up to the collar, hands in my pockets, breath clouding in the air. And as I passed a quiet fountain in the middle of the square, I saw a child kneeling to touch the water, her mother watching close by, and I thought, this is what we're trying to protect. Not titles, not legacies, but space for women like her to grow up believing they never have to trade their silence for safety. When I got home, the cactus was blooming again. 2 flowers this time, yellow and strong. I didn't need to take a photo, I just stood there, letting it imprint itself into memory. Because in the end, there's no medal for surviving betrayal, no trophy for dignity, just the quiet knowing that you didn't become what tried to break you. You outlasted it. It's strange how something as soft as memory can weigh more than stone. People think closure is a moment, one big scene, a final line, a slamming door, but it isn't. It's the accumulation of small silences that no longer sting. It's walking past a familiar building and not looking up. It's hearing a name and not feeling your stomach knot. I knew I had reached that point when I found the old badge. It was buried in the bottom of a drawer, beneath a stack of unused notebooks and half-spent pens. The lanyard was frayed, the plastic yellowed at the edges. My picture-stiff smile, neutral eyes stared back like a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. For a moment, I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight. Not because I missed it, but because I didn't. I tossed it in the trash, not out of bitterness, but clarity. That person was gone, and I didn't need her back. That week, our team hit a milestone we hadn't planned for. A client we had signed months earlier became our biggest partner overnight. Word had spread not through ads or case studies, but through people, real people, recommending us not just for what we did, but how we made them feel safe, heard, respected. I watched as my team handled the new volume with ease. No panic, no scrambling, just presence, purpose, confidence without noise. And in the midst of all this quiet momentum, I received one last letter, handwritten, no return address again, inside a single sheet. No greeting, no name, just one line. It was never personal, just business. I folded the letter in half, then in half again, then again, until it was small enough to disappear into the bottom of my coat pocket. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I just carried it through the rest of the day like a reminder of the lie people tell when they don't want to face what they've done, because it was personal. It always is. Every choice, every silence, every cold dismissal wrapped in protocol. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not because I forgave, but because I outgrew the need to be understood by the people who misunderstood me on purpose. That night, I stood by the river again. Not the one from my childhood. A new one. Wider. Slower. But the sound was the same. The hush of water against stone. The steady rhythm of something ancient that has nothing to prove. I stepped closer, closed my eyes, and let the air fill my lungs. I remembered my father's voice, not the words this time, but the tone, the way he never raised it, even when the world tried to rush him, the way he held space, not with force, with presence. That's what I had learned. That stillness isn't what happens when the storm ends. It's what survives it. I opened my eyes and let the river reflect me not as I was, not as they tried to define me, but as I had become. Not louder, not harder, just deeper. We never held a one-year gala. No performance reviews framed with corporate slogans. Just people, working and growing, trusting. Every week, someone leaves another broken company, and sometimes they find their way to us. Sometimes they just want to talk. Sometimes they want to work. And every time, I ask them the same question: what did they take from you that you're ready to reclaim? They always pause, because it's never just about the job. It's about being seen again. And I see them, because I remember what it was like to be erased. But not anymore. Now, I'm the one who stays quiet when others panic, who doesn't blink when the room turns cold, who listens longer than she speaks. And when people ask why our company works, why the turnover is low, the loyalty high, the rooms full of calm instead of chaos, I never mention metrics. I just tell them this: we're led by women who don't flinch, and we're not going anywhere. I visited the river one last time that spring, alone. No speech, no reason, no audience. Just a quiet morning with the trees leaning over the banks like they, too, were remembering something. The current was slower than I remembered. Or maybe I had just learned how to stand still long enough to see the rhythm beneath it. I stepped closer, letting the gravel shift beneath my boots, and watched a single leaf spin in the eddy, caught but not crushed. That used to be me caught in systems I didn't design, expectations I never agreed to, and dynamics that rewarded silence only when it was submissive. But I had learned something in the stillness, something no performance review or leadership seminar could ever teach. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew what it was. Another request for a meeting, another inquiry about our culture, another executive trying to understand how we had done it, how we'd built something so steady, so quietly, without burning bridges or buying attention. The truth was simple. We didn't build with noise. We built with integrity. Every decision we made echoed that. From how we hired to how we listen. From how we set boundaries to how we let people leave, if they needed to. There were no exit interviews laced with guilt, no threats disguised as opportunities. Just clarity. I stood by the river for a long time that morning, not searching for answers, not waiting for a sign, just being. And in that stillness, I realized I had become something I never thought I could be. Untouchable. Not because I was ruthless, but because I had nothing left to prove. No one to chase. No lies to uphold. The story had already been written in the steady hands of the people who stayed, who grew, who remembered what it felt like to rebuild from nothing. Sometimes I still think about the day I was fired, the fluorescent lights, the empty hallway, the silence that greeted me as I packed my things. It wasn't the worst day of my life. It was the truest. Because that was the day I stopped performing loyalty for people who measured worth in output, not in humanity. That was the day I started walking out of rooms that only tolerated me, and into ones where I could breathe. I never went back to that building. Didn't need to. It's gone now anyway. Sold off. Repurposed. The company collapsed slowly. Then suddenly, like all things built on silence, with the wrong intentions. But I don't need to see the rubble. Because I'm standing in what I built instead. A place where women are not decorations. Where grief doesn't get you fired, where stillness isn't mistaken for weakness, and where the rocks, like my father said, don't move, they outlast. People ask me if I feel vindicated, if I'd do it the same way again, and I tell them this: I never wanted revenge, I wanted renewal, and I got it. Not in headlines or courtroom victories, but in the quiet click of doors opening for the right people, at the right time, into the right kind of work. My name isn't on the front of the building. It doesn't need to be. The legacy isn't carved in glass or etched in stone. It's in the way we move, unrushed, unbothered, unshaken. The river still runs. The cactus still blooms. And I am exactly where I need to be. Thank you all for listening to my story until the very end. I hope that, even just a little, what I've shared can bring something meaningful to you. Goodbye, and see you again.